Welcome to this conversation with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. We appreciate your spending some time with us today. American history, multifaceted as it is, has been shaped over the centuries in many ways by Jews across the globe. When it comes to American Jewish history, Dr. Jenna Weissman Joselit is in a league of her own. A renowned historian, curator, author, and lecturer, Dr. Joselit continues to bring us fresh and fascinating insights about American Jewish identity and the myriad ways in which Jewish people have been impacted by and have themselves impacted life in the United States. A specialist in the history and culture of America's Jews and in US cultural history from the late 19th century on through the 1950s, Dr. Joselit focuses particularly on material culture and identity and has written numerous articles and books, including The Wonders of America, Reinventing Jewish Culture, 1880 to 1950, which won the 1995 National Jewish Book Award in History. Most recently, Dr. Joselit was a distinguished visiting scholar at the John W. Kluge Center of the Library of Congress and is currently the Charles E. Smith Professor of Judaic Studies and Professor of History at George Washington University. I'll speak with Dr. Joselit about her book, Set in Stone, America's Embrace of the Ten Commandments, as well as the evolution of church-state relations in America and American Jewish life, culture, and history since the late 19th century. Dr. Joselit, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure. What a lovely introduction. Thank you, thank you.
Well, let's start with your book, Set in Stone. It covered new ground in social history. The book traces the recognition and celebration of Judeo-Christian values in both American life and in democratic governance. Can you speak about the book in terms of why you chose to look at the evolution of American life through this particular lens? Because in your previous writing, you talk about what we eat, how we dress ourselves, our history in New York. The Ten Commandments, tell us about what drew you to that.
Okay, well, actually, it's not so far-fetched. What the book really focuses in on are the ways in which the Ten Commandments make themselves felt in daily life. They are the most richly imagined of all biblical sources, and they're everywhere in America. And what drew me in particular to writing about them was the sight of a demonstration many years ago on the steps of the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court was considering two cases that relate to the Ten Commandments. And there were all of these men in shorts wielding paper mache Ten Commandments. And I thought, this is a story. There's something here about the notion of holding aloft these faux cardboard Ten Commandments and trying to make a case for how central they were to America's landscape, literally its landscape. And then I began to dig away, as one does, and found tons of stuff that reflected not just the intellectual or the theological or the symbolic, but the literal, the physical, the tangible presence of the Ten Commandments, plaques and billboards and jewelry and children's games, and even B'nai B'rith material, as I've recently discovered. There's not only the intellectual imprint of the Ten Commandments, but carries visual testament to them as well. So that really intrigued me. So in a way, the book just kind of moves on the same trajectory, except instead of taking an aspect of what we think of as ordinary life, it takes this seemingly sacred, textual, extremely ancient phenomenon and shows the ways in which it makes itself felt in daily life.
How does America see the Ten Commandments writ large? I mean, is this kind of a non-sectarian view, or talking now about the non-Jewish community, I mean, do they connect it? Do they connect it to Jewish history? Do they see it that way, or how do they see it?
No, I think that in much the same way that many folks in this country see America as the new promised land, as blessed, as providential. I mean, that notion goes way back. They see the Ten Commandments as a covenant between themselves and a higher higher authority. I sometimes joke around that Americans in the late 19th and early 20th century acted as if they were the ones who stood at Sinai, not the ancient Israelites. So I think there is something in the American character that seizes on the Ten Commandments as an American phenomenon, an American foundational document, and the relationship between that document and the historical circumstances in which it arose tends to get lost in the shuffle. So one might think, not so good for the Jews that what was fundamentally theirs becomes essentially nationalized, Americanized. But it turns out the fascinating pivot here is that American Jews are very proud of that relationship. And the notion that they bequeathed to America a kind of foundational document, a quintessential gift, is a very uplifting and affirming one. I guess if you wanted to talk in real simple terms, you could say that the Ten Commandments becomes a kind of fulcrum for neighborliness and common ground. And then I would do that one better and say that, well, in the years well before the Judeo-Christian heritage rhetorical gambit became the currency of the land, which is really post-World War II. I think this fascination with the Ten Commandments stood in for that kind of conceit, common bond, comity, things that we're noticeably lacking in today.
Well, I know when I go to the Capitol building, and there is, I think it's the bas-relief of Moses the lawgiver.
Right.
I know it fills me with a great deal of pride. But I want to go back to your description of the folks on the steps, the Supreme Court, and these cases that were brought before the court, and also to bring in the Decalogue statues, the Fraternal Order of Eagles. I know you've done a lot of research on that. Do you think that American Jews, I mean, we know separation of church and state, very important to us. So many discussions over the years, over Christmas displays, et cetera. But in this particular case on the Ten Commandments, do you think that many Jews are kind of torn by this? On the one hand, there is the separation issue, but on the other hand, that there is a great deal of pride in the fact that the Ten Commandments are something that we Jews, through Moses, brought to the world. How do you see it?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think that the fact that the watchdog defense organizations in the United States, like the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, ADL, didn't actively pursue a fight to remove them from the public square when they first emerged on the public square in the years right after World War II, suggests that this was not a fight they wanted to invest in because the stakes were a little bit too high. They did a lot, particularly the Congress did a lot of, the American Jewish Congress, I should say, did a lot of behind the scenes lobbying to try and dissuade the Fraternal Order of Eagles from planting these Ten Commandments on civic grounds, on public square. You want to do it privately, that's one thing, but publicly or not. But their heart, I think, wasn't really in it because they knew that the stakes were too high, and that in a way, this was an opportunity to showcase what Jews and Christians, there were very few Muslims in the US at that time, so Jews and Christians had in common, and so decided to fight the good fight elsewhere. Also, there's something about a statue, as we now know, monuments, they don't quite, not until recently, engender the same kind of emotional and intellectual response as activity in a classroom, say. So the American Jewish Congress was much more perturbed, and rightly so, by attempts to have the Ten Commandments recited in the classroom, in the public school classroom, and they worked very diligently to make sure that that didn't happen. The cases that came along in the early 2000s, which the Supreme Court adjudicated finally in 2005, reflects a very different understanding of church-state and the role of minority politics, and in particular, the ways in which the Ten Commandments no longer quite bind us together as they might have in an earlier issue. I think the simplest way of characterizing it is to say the Ten Commandments are one hell of a sticky wicket. On one hand, they do this, on the other hand, they do something else. But that ultimately they stand as something that is a way to bring past and present together in a physical form.
Well, let's move to popular culture and the Ten Commandments, particularly the advent of cinema. Cecil B. DeMille, his biblical films. The first was the silent version of the Ten Commandments in 1923. How was the film received at that time? And what about the campaign to publicize it? And then we'll move to 1956. But let's talk about the first film.
Right, the 1923, which I actually like a lot better than the 1956 version, was enormously well received by the general community, but especially by the Jewish community. Because this was the first time that a major production, it wasn't some kind of rinky-dink filmic adventure. It was the handiwork of one of the great showmen in American film life. It was splendid. It was resplendent in all sorts of special effects. And it used quite a number of recently arrived Eastern European immigrants as extras. And people knew that. That was a story that was heavily reported in the English language Jewish press, as well as in the Yiddish press. And so American Jews felt a particular kind of kinship that the recently arrived among them were actually reenacting the biblical Exodus, but this time round on the shores of Guadalupe, the United States, Southern California, not on the shores of the Holy Land. So it was received with great delight and acclaim, and featured very prominently in advertisements, in sermons, in all sorts of feature articles. The 56 one was also received very enthusiastically, but quite a lot of water had passed under the bridge between the 20s and the 50s. I think American Jews are just emerging from World War II and the awareness of how fragile Jewish life was. And so I don't think that they greeted the 56 with quite the same degree of exuberance as they did the first one. But even so, they kept very active statistics on how well the film was doing. They talked a lot about it. They particularly revered the ways in which Cecil B. DeMille this time around didn't make use so much of extras as of history, as of scholarship into biblical antiquity to shore up his case. So I would say that it loomed large. And then it has an afterlife, the fact that it continues to show up on ABC TV every year for the past, I don't know how many years, on that little interregnum between Easter and Passover suggests that it retains a kind of hold, although I suspect many people who watch it today do it with a kind of raised eyebrow, not with the kind of innocent affirmation that they might have shown in the 50s, certainly in the 20s.
Well,
have you ever watched it? Do you watch it?
Well, yes, of course. In the interest of full disclosure, my parents were immigrants, and they didn't really go to too many movies, but they took me to the Scenic Theater in Keene, New Hampshire, which is where I grew up. They took me to see the Ten Commandments when it came out first run, and there was a great deal of pride in the fact that this was being shown, that it was a biblical epic, and it was treated in a fairly in a way that was fair to Jews, or the reading of the story. Yes, a lot of actors that we all know, and then fearful Edward G. Robinson playing Dathan. It was quite a film, but it was something that was important to them. How do you think it's received today? Now, you mentioned that it's kind of maybe it's a period piece today,
right.
but it's the fact that ABC continues to show it must mean something. What do you think that is in their mind?
Yeah, I think that's a ritual moment all its own. I've heard tell, I've never experienced, but I've heard tell that contemporary Jews incorporate elements, some contemporary Jews incorporate elements of the movie into their Passover Seder. I don't know if they do that with a wink and a giggle or do it straight up, but there's something totemic about this film that endures, has so many shelf lives, I don't know that it holds up quite as well. That's why I say I think the 20s, because it's so much more simple and direct, although it's complicated too, because it has a so-called prologue story, which is the story of the giving of, and then it has the story of a contemporary Christian family whose lives fall short because they don't obey the Ten Commandments. That sort of gets left out of the discussion, but there's something very endearing, very earnest about the Ten Commandments of the 1920s, where the 1950s one is very bombastic. It's all about the large screen, special effects, big movie, big. The intimacy, I think, of the 1920s version, which you could now get online and through DVDs, is it's very sweet, very sweet.
Are there other essential social, cultural, and religious forces that propelled the Ten Commandments into prominence beyond these films?
Yeah, I think the fact that you can find them on license plates, and when I started to write the book, I started to collect stuff, and I now have quite the collection of Ten Commandments bracelets. A charm for each commandment dangles from my wrist. I mean, I don't wear it, but it's in my drawer, but I know it's there. Calendar art, license plates, and I think the continuing presence of these Ten Commandments monuments. A couple of years ago, a gentleman who didn't exactly relish their presence in the civic square, I forget which town it was in Arkansas, actually drove his car through one and toppled it. And within a matter of days, a group popped up called the American Heritage and History Group, or the American History and Heritage Group, and raised a lot of money and were able to restore it back to its pedestal. That tells me something about the need to see it, the need to lay claim to it publicly. It's one thing to have it in your heart, or to see it in a synagogue, or to see it in some kind of public space like a courthouse, but the need to have it really strongly stationed in the public square is something else again. And after having spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, it still really puzzles me as to why that's so important. But there seems to be some importance, and no other country, not even Israel, makes as much hay of the Ten Commandments as the United States. So that tells me something about the perceived importance of the Ten Commandments to Americans, whether they can articulate it or whether they can actually count them most properly. Most cannot. Most Americans probably know a couple and then insert into the Ten Commandments a couple of other things that are not there. But it's not the specifics. I think it's the totality of the Ten Commandments, because they offer a sense of the possibility of life, a blueprint, promise, rule of law, all of those things that we hold dear can be nestled within the grooves of the Ten Commandments.
How do you think America's non-sectarian regard for the Ten Commandments affected the celebration of Passover in America in any way, do you think?
I don't know that it did. The only way I could answer that is that there is a Haggadah, a Passover Seder text, which Paramount Pictures produced, which instead of the lovely old-fashioned drawings, there are stills from the film that are inserted into the appropriate moments in the text. So that tells me something about something very clever marketing ploy, or a commodification of the movie, or an attempt to give the movie an afterlife. So that, I think, speaks to it. I need to give some more thought. It's a really interesting point as to whether the primacy of the Ten Commandments in American culture also spurs on greater attentiveness to Passover. I don't know. I mean, that Moses does not loom large in the Passover Haggadah. The Exodus does, but Moses himself doesn't. He's kind of conspicuous by his absence. But I think the story of the Exodus probably affects how American Jews relate to Passover more than the actual Ten Commandments.
Because I'm asking, because we're told that today the most popular holiday, our holidays, is Passover. Now, I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with the fact that this is a family gathering, and it's an opportunity for people to get together around the table. but I'm wondering if there isn't some kind of impact from, and put it another way, we talked about it before, kind of a certain pride in the fact that we connect the Exodus to the Ten Commandments and then to the holiday itself. So
Could be. It's certainly well worth exploring. Not by me. I'm finished with the Ten Commandments, but
well,
as somebody else.
I'd now like to shift a little bit go back to the 1950s. We were talking about 1956 and DeMille. Kind of give us a picture of life in America for the Jewish community. What were the trends in the 50s, and how did Jews spend their leisure time? What were the religious observances at play in American Jewish life?
Wonderful question. The 50s is really a very generative time. American Jews in astoundingly large numbers are forsaking the city for the suburbs. They're building enormously capacious synagogues. Sanctuaries can seat anywhere from 500 to 2,000 people. The rise of the State of Israel has engendered an enormous sense of pride and connectiveness. You have the increasingly prominent shadows of what comes to be known as the Shoah, coloring sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly what American Jews are doing. You have a surge in the number of children. You have the emergence of Hanukkah as a increasingly popular celebration. Hanukkah was once very modest, very modest, and it emerges not just as one commentary writer, a parent put it in commentary, that it had emerged as a competitive winter sport, but that it begins to hold its own as one of the happy holidays to which Americans subscribe. So I think that the 50s, though it often gets overlooked, is an extremely exciting and germinative time for American Jews. And then you also have the emergence in a very big way of the Judeo-Christian heritage notion, which further cements American Jewry's sense of being one with the American people and no longer a minority religion or a marginalized population, but kind of truly American. And this, with everything else, results in a very, very lively, very busy period for American Jews. And you also have a surfeit of goodies that are coming from Israel, all sorts of new forms of public identification that are handcrafted in Israel, which further cements a relationship between the two countries. So a wonderful time in American history.
The television, of course, was the golden age of television.
That too, yes.
And were we beginning to see portrayals of Jews, Jewish stories? I think of some Jewish episodes on certain series that had Jewish characters, very Jewish characters. To even a program like Gunsmoke, there were itinerant peddlers, and they made a story about Jews. Was there more of an ease in telling these stories on the part of the television folks and in the motion pictures, more and more being told about Jews to kind of understand what Jews are about?
I'd have to take a look back at some of those portrayals. I wasn't aware of the peddler character in Gunsmoke. I think that the answer, like so many answers to American Jewish history, is a bit yes and no. Yes, the industry is employing more and more writers of Jewish background in particular. I think some of the inside jokes, some of the tone of TV and movies bespeaks a kind of Jewishness, but I don't know that the characters that emerge fully in their own right as full throttle Jewish characters. They put in an appearance, but whether they're read as Jewish, sort of depends on the audience. I'm thinking, for example, of Mary Tyler Moore Show is a great example. Mary Tyler, no, not Mary Tyler Moore, Dick Van Dyke Show. Then you have Sid Caesar, you have Mel Brooks. All of these talents are emerging whose sense of Jewishness is bound up very much with a droll sense of humor. So that I think speaks to the growing presence of Jewishness, but how that Jewishness is interpreted, and how it often verges on stereotype rather than complex and nuanced. That's another kettle of fish.
And if I could bring it up to the present, kind of the mainstreaming of certain things Jewish. I'm thinking of food, for example,
Right.
or I'm thinking of the bagel, or even hummus, which many people's claim to be theirs, but we in our community we look to Israel as being the place where you get the best. But in terms of the broader American picture, more and more has been mainstream. More and more Jewish has been mainstream. How do you see that?
Well, I think it's of a piece with the mainstreaming of other ethnic cultures as well. You think of Italian cuisine, you think of, talking now about the food scene, Italian cuisine and Asian foodstuffs and Middle Eastern foods. So the Jewish dimension of the culinary world is part of that process. I also think that Jewishness becomes more and more familiar and less and less on the fringes. And that the people who have the opportunity to define what we eat and not control, but concoct what we see on TV and in the movies are not constrained by concerns of assimilation or just kind of keep it under wraps as some of their predecessors might have been. So little by little, the cumulative effect is that Jewishness is kind of defanged and rendered less exotic and out there and becomes more part of the general maelstrom of American culture.
Well, I want to go back to the book if I can, because it really is it's such a unique and a fascinating topic. Just to kind of close on this, what do you think are the 2 or 3 important takeaways from Set in Stone? If there's anything to learn from this? Again, the broader American picture, this great contribution that's been made, these laws to live by.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all out there in so many ways in so many places as you described. So what should the reader take away from this?
I think I don't know if I have 3 things, but 2 big things. One is the ways in which the membrane between religion and culture is very porous in the United States. That things that at one point occupied a very delimited religious sphere managed to kind of seep into the larger culture and infuse the larger culture, not only in terms of celebration or food, but also in terms of our politics and the ways in which Americans see the world. So that's something to bear in mind. The second is the ways that Americans seek out perfectibility. And believe that perfectibility is within reach. And one of the things that the 10 Commandments does is to hold out that promise of perfectibility. That, yes, as one wonderful president recently said, yes, we can. And that, yes, we can, I think, is very much predicated, again, sometimes consciously and sometimes more subtly, on the hold that the 10 Commandments has on our collective imagination. Because implicit in the 10 Commandments is that if you just live by these 10 principles, your life will be full and good and resonant and just. And I think that notion of being just in the world and living a good life, that's within reach and needn't be held over until the next life is something that Americans hold very dear. And it's what distinguishes America from lots of other places. How's that for a takeaway? Is that good takeaways?
That's a good takeaway. But I have one more question.
Okay.
What can we look forward to seeing from you in the near future?
I
You've
don't know.
covered
I'm
so many
toying
interesting
around.
topics.
Yeah. Well, I continue to write my monthly column for Tablet magazine, and that allows me to explore lots of fun topics. So I have a piece coming out any day now on space, not outer space, but physical space in the Jews, and how I, no thanks to COVID-19, have come to appreciate, where once I didn't, the large footprint of the post-war synagogue and what what embracing space tells us about the post-war American Jewish community. And then I'm also toying with a big project, which is like the Ten Commandments in the sense that it's both Jewish and not Jewish at the same time, and that is a cultural history of fun. I'm very interested in the ways in which fun, the pursuit of pleasure, becomes something that is very distinctive to American culture and becomes a value, a highly regarded value in teaching, in social life, even in religion. I'm not sure how I'm going to get to all of this because there is no finite body of funniana that I'll be able to explore, but I hope to rise to the challenge and figure out why fun is something that, along with the Ten Commandments, Americans hold dear.
Well, the book is Set in Stone, America's Embrace of the Ten Commandments by Dr. Jenna Weissman Joselit, and is available online wherever you purchase books. Dr. Joselit, thank you so much for your incredible contributions to American Jewish history and for speaking with us today.
It's my great pleasure, Dan. Thank you so much. And happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Tremendous thanks to Dr. Jenna Weissman Joselit for joining me today to discuss American Jewish history and her most recent book, Set in Stone, America's Embrace of the Ten Commandments. And thank you for tuning in to this conversation with B'nai B'rith. Well, if you enjoyed this discussion, make sure you never miss a program by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel, liking us on Facebook, and following us on Twitter. And be sure to visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our important work. See you again soon, everyone. Take care.